I hope you can hear me well. You have to type in into the chat box. Jonathan, can you hear me okay? All right, super. I'm going to clear the chat. I'm recording this session, so if in case we need to share it with others or you need to review. I was just chatting with William earlier. He said that after going over some of the material and so forth, things are beginning to make more sense, and that is perfectly common, and I've experienced it over and over. And the reason is that after you go through the motion of taking an exam and you agonize over it, then when somebody explains things, it begins to make a lot more sense than it did the first time around. That's one. Second is that this is a subject that you slowly mature in it. It just sort of grows on you and you learn every day a little bit more. If you can overcome the frustration and anxiety, which usually destroys anybody's productivity when you convince yourself that this is too complicated. So I'm hoping that this session tonight with the three of us, I can begin to make inroads in with the background of like 5-6 weeks of working on this subject. So anytime you have a question, please raise the hand. There's a click somewhere you can click and raise your hand, and or just type in and I will look and then try to respond to it. So we're going to have a review session. And the way we're going to approach this is this. Every product or service has two sides, demand side and the supply side. If that was not the case, we would not even been talking about it. So we first chapter, I believe 3 and 4, mostly focus on the demand side. And the idea there was very simple. First, we started off with the law of demand, in which basically said price and quantity are negatively correlated, holding all other factors constant, which means that we only think of price and quantity. If taste, if age, if political views, if gender, all of those has an impact on the demand for a product, we're going to hold it steady and only focus on the link between price and quantity. And we know that these two variables, price of a product and the quantity of a product, are negatively correlated, which means that they move in opposite direction. When price goes up, this leads to reduction in purchase in quantity. When price goes down, this leads to increase in quantity purchased or consumed. Okay? Holding everything else constant. That's very important at this point. And that's why, because they move in opposite direction, the relationship is negative. So in order to give it a picture or somehow take these words and give it a sort of visual representation, we develop demand curve. So okay, quantity of let's say snack food and price of snack food. And the idea is that if the price is set at a certain level, people buy a certain quantity, P0, Q0. If the price is dropped, then people typically will consume or purchase larger quantities. And if the price dropped even more, people most likely will consume more or purchase more. And then if we connect these points and everywhere in between, that gives us the demand curve. So we took the law of demand and gave it a picture or gave it a shape, because this is good enough to show that there is a negative relationship between price and quantity, but we need to do a lot more with this than the law of demand states. So therefore we have to kind of give it a visual representation, because it makes it a whole lot easier for us to discuss all sorts of other stuff that will follow. So that's the idea right there. And then if you say, well, Professor, is there anything else besides the price, obviously, that makes me buy certain things? Yes, obviously. So for that reason, we expanded this conversation to include other stuff. So we say quantity demanded for snack food depends on its price of a snack food. This is not San Francisco, it's snack food. And then price of other food items, price of complement items or goods and services, income, and a whole bunch of other things. I'm going to leave it open and then close the parenthesis. This portion, we already talked about it. Price and quantity. And we said this relationship is a negative one. And we drew it as an initial curve. But we held everything else constant. Now we want to account for the other stuff. So it's all right. We hold the price constant and let other variables change. For instance, what happens if price of other food items become cheaper? Well, if that's the case, people buy smaller quantity of snack food. So demand shifts to the left. Before people bought this quantity, now they buy less. Why? Because price of these other goods went down and people will switch to the other products, buy less of our product. What if the price of other snack food items go up? Well, people switch out of that product into our product. So even though we haven't changed the price, demand will increase. So this is increase in demand at this price. This is decrease in demand at the same price. Again, initially we held everything else constant. We just allowed the price to change. So we went up and down. Now we hold the price constant, allow these other variables to change, and then account for what happens to the demand for the product. What happens? Price of complement goods go up. Imagine you say, well, what's complement to a snack? You say, well, you never have snack with a soda, without a soda. Or if very minimum, you have to travel to get it, you have to account for those as well. So let's say sodas are what you usually consume, a Coke or a Pepsi, with your snack food. So if the price of Coke or Pepsi goes up, the whole package becomes more expensive. If you pay $2 for this and another dollar for that, that's $3. Now they jack up the Pepsi to $1.50. Suddenly your price is $3.50, and you say, well, $3 I was okay, but $3.50 maybe not. If that's the case, some people cut back. Demand shrinks. If complement prices go down, the whole package will become less expensive and people buy more. If this was, let's say, demand for cars and gasoline is the complement good, as gas prices go up, people consume or demand less automobile in driving or size of the car, etc. When gas prices go down, people consume more automobile in the form of driving, etc., purchasing, etc. And all around you, there are all sorts of complement goods. You will be hard pressed to find any product that doesn't have another product that goes with it. If you tell me what's a complement good to eat an apple, I say, well, very minimum time. You have to have time to consume it. If I gave it to you for free, if you're busy and you are running into a meeting, you will not accept the apple because you don't have the complement good, which happens to be time. So what about the role of income? Well, if the product is normal good, when people's income on average goes up, they buy more. And if the income goes down, they buy less. So there are some goods that are income sensitive, like Starbucks coffee or gourmet bread or expensive restaurants. Those are income sensitive. When people have more income and better jobs and so forth, the demand for those products will shift to the right. And if the income goes down, then the demand for those products shifts to the left. Now, as you notice, I left this wide open, meaning that other variables that can influence the demand for a product that you need to account for, and that comes from your expertise or knowledge of the product. Some products may be linked to the weather. Ice cream, umbrellas, raincoats, boots, beer, etc. I mean, average temperature influences the consumption of it. Certain products has to do with age, medicine, certain kind of vacations, etc., etc. So therefore, age of the population will have an impact on the demand for a product, etc., etc. Some products may have to do with the gender of the consumer, or race of the consumer, or culture of the consumer, on and on and on and on. That's why I left it open for someone to fill in the blank. These are standard issue variables. Once again, when the price of the product itself changes, you go up and down to find different quantities. But if anything else, like price of other goods, price of complement goods, income, taste, whatever, you capture the impact of those by shifting the curve to the right or to the left, and you see what happens to the quantity purchased or consumed at a fixed price. Because first we hold all these variables constant, play with the price. Next we hold price constant with a bar on top and play with these to see what it does to the demand for the product. Okay. The next question we'd like to answer is, all right, we understand, fair enough. When a price goes up, people buy less, and when a price goes down, people buy more. I got it. But the question is, by how much? It's not enough to just say when the price goes up, people buy less and so forth. We need to know how much, because if you don't know by how much, you don't know how to react to it. If you're selling a product and you want to lower the price, you better know in advance how consumers are going to react to it. Otherwise, you may lower the price and nobody cares. So you lost the money on price and nobody bought anymore. Or you raise the price and so many people walked away that you shoot yourself and say, why did I raise the price? I lost so many customers. So for that reason, we'll look at the concept of demand elasticity. In this case, let's start with the price elasticity. Well, the definition is this. Elasticity is defined as this. Percent change in quantity demanded for, let's say, snack food when there is some percentage change in price of the snack food. Okay? So we want to, let me make sure that this is as focused as I can get it. There's better. Now, this is not as complicated as it looks. The reason we deal with percentage is because imagine something is selling for $99 and you raise it to $100. That's $1 increase. And then another thing is selling for $1 and you raise it to $2. This is also $1 increase, but in this case you double the price, 100% hike. In this case you went from 99 to 100. It's just almost 1%. That's why same dollar in different contexts is not the same dollar. That's why we look at the percentage change instead of absolute amount. Now, I don't want to bog you down too much on this issue, only to say the following. Look at these two demand curves. Let's say quantity of cigarettes then you have price of cigarettes. When the product cigarettes come out of the factory, the same for both. That's a supply. I haven't talked about it, but I'm going to put it in here just for us to see. However, this left market is for addicted adults, smokers. This one is for casual teen smokers. All right. Well, what's going on with addicted adult smokers? Well, adult smokers have money most often. If you're addicted, you're hooked. You give up vacation, you give up restaurants, you give up lots of things to be able to afford your cigarette because you're addicted. So the demand for you, if you're addicted adult with income, is large for cigarettes and you are price insensitive. On the other hand, for casual teen smoker who has a limited budget, and if he didn't smoke is not end of the world, he just smokes to impress, let's say, the opposite sex, just say that I'm somebody or something. So therefore, demand is small and price sensitive. Now let's look at these two, see what it means. Here is the equilibrium price, and this is the quantity this typical consumer purchases. a pack a day or whatever, doesn't matter. Here is the equilibrium price for these guys, and this is the quantity, maybe half a pack or something. Now let's see what happens when I change the price. In this case, I raise the price by a certain percent and trace it to the demand curve, and then come down to the quantity, and you see barely changed. Because if you're addicted, you smoke as much as you can handle. You don't go crazy just because price went down. By the same token, if I drop the price and trace it to the demand curve, you can see the increase in demand. Let me go backtrack here. When I raised the price, this demand should have been to the left, slight reduction. When I drop the price, there's a slight increase. But you can see I've changed the price significantly in percent, let's say, and the quantity demanded is barely moved. This is a case of inelastic or price insensitive demand. And it's obvious that people who are addicted, they buy based on their need, their physiology, not because of the price fluctuation. Now look at in here. Even small increase in price will cause a big reduction in consumption, and a small decrease in price results in a significant increase in consumption. These people are elastic or price sensitive. Now this is very important tool to understand that supply is the same. When a cigarette is pumped out of the factory, doesn't matter, they don't care who's buying it. It's cost the same, manufactured the same, etc. There's no such thing as cigarette for teenagers and cigarette for adults under the same brand. So therefore, cost, everything is the same. But it is the difference in elasticity of, or the slope of the demand curve that determines the implication for price fluctuation. And it's very intuitive. If you are hooked, if you love the product, if the commercial has worked on you, you believe in it, you sign a contract that you cannot walk away, etc., etc. Doesn't matter what the price is, you stay. That's why cell phone companies tend to make you sign a contract. So for next 2 years, even if you see better prices somewhere else, you cannot respond to it. You're stuck. Now the strategy I've seen on TV is slowly changing and say no contract, because they figured that perhaps that's a bad idea. Once you sign a contract for next 2 years, they cannot change price on you, etc. Or people tend to not want to change things around. When you sign a contract, you want to leave it alone until the contract is up before you change the plan or buy a new phone. They say, why are we doing this? Let's remove the contract. So people are crazy and every 3 months want to get a upgrade phones. They don't postpone it just because they said, let me, my 2 years run out, I'll go get it. So they have done their numbers. They realize that these contracts, when at one point used to be beneficial to the companies, lock you in, prevent you from leaving unless you pay penalty, etc., now is counterproductive, because people like to change cell phone, they like to change plans and so forth. And if you tell them that you have 2 years, they may just be reluctant to touch it until the 2 years over. And so they figure that this is not helping with the business. In this case, small fluctuation in price causes big change in quantity demanded. Now, What does it mean? What do we use this for? Well, in this case, if you raise the price, since you don't lose much customers, you're better off to raise the price because you make money on raising the price, not losing much money on losing the volume. Does it make sense to lower the price? No, because you drop the price, you hardly gain market share or additional customers. You lose money on the price, don't gain on the volume, so total revenue is worse than would be otherwise. So when your customers are stuck with you, are price insensitive, which means they don't have a place to run as an option. Because as soon as you're price insensitive, what does that tell you? It means you're stuck. In this case, you're stuck because you're addicted, or you're stuck because there are no other options, you're stuck because your life depends on it, you're stuck because you love the problem, whatever is the reason. If you're stuck with anything, you pay top prices. And they can jerk you around by raising the price because they know you either love it or you don't have a place to run, you pay. But does it make sense for them to lower the price because by the same token people are not buying based on price, they're buying based on their need, etc., etc. In this case, the opposite. If you drop the price slightly, you gain big market. So it makes sense in this case to drop the price, but doesn't make sense to raise the price like the other case because consumers have choice. You don't raise price on consumers who have choice. They go somewhere else, they drop the product, it's not a big deal anyway to them, they were just consuming it casually, etc. You don't want to raise prices on those customers because they react big time, cut back. You gained a little bit on price, lost big on volume. And so therefore, that's why knowledge of price elasticity, which means the knowledge of the consumer's ability to react to your price changes, is very important before you change the price. If you don't know this information, you may shoot yourself in the foot and that will cost you a lot of money. Example, Netflix raised the price after it became so popular. They raised the price, monthly fee. I think 800,000 got together on the internet and dropped the program. They decided to bail out of the Netflix. They apologized, reversed the price hike, and essentially said, we're sorry, we screwed up. Because first they thought, oh, these people love this Netflix so much that they're upping their cable, etc., etc. So let's raise the price. Why not? They'll pay. But they underestimated how they're going to get the backlash, so they were forced to reduce the price. So let me see. So the aspirin a day example would be between the two graphs, a medium slope. You could argue that, but imagine you are having a history of a colon cancer in the family, and the news that comes across your computer or newspaper says that aspirins will reduce the chance of colon cancer by 75%. Oh well, before you used to go and buy aspirin for occasional use, and therefore your demand for the aspirin was normal. Of course you get headache, and therefore you didn't want to be caught without aspirin. It's not like you're totally price insensitive. There are other products that compete with aspirin. You could switch to those, etc., etc. You could argue, yeah, you have a sort of an average price sensitivity. Demand is neither steep or very flat. However, the news says that this aspirin wanted at one aspirin a day can reduce the chance of colon cancer by 75%, or I don't know, 300%. And you happen to be one of those with a history of colon cancer in the family, guess what? Two things will happen. Not only you buy more than usual amount of aspirin, but if the aspirin prices from $5 for 50 aspirin or 100 aspirin went to $25, you will pay. Because of that good news and how it's relevant to you, suddenly if somebody took all the aspirins off the shelf and started selling them for $25, you're willing to pay the price. The fact that you don't end up doing it is because it's not worth for Walmart to look at your family history of colon cancer and say, you're one of those I can, gouge. So let me charge you $25, and the other person who maybe gets a headache once every 2 years, charge him 50 cents. So, with the supply of aspirin no different today than before the news came out, you bought this quantity and paid this price. Now you buy this quantity and you're willing to pay much higher price. That's how you use this tool to analyze so many different scenarios. I had an email from one of your cohorts that was wondering, you say, why do we even bother with graphs, etc.? This is why we need graphs, to help us to predict and map the consumer reaction under different circumstances and what happens to the equilibrium price and quantity. This was price 0 Q0, now it's P1 Q1. Please interject anytime that these things don't make sense. If we went back to the previous example, what if I add tax to cigarettes? We haven't talked about the supply curve, but for now, if I add tax, this is supply plus tax, this is same shift, supply plus tax. You could see in this case, if this was the equilibrium price, now jumps way up, and they can't cut back much anyway. In this case was the equilibrium price, and the new price is just slightly above. These people, because they're stuck with the product, they paid most of the taxes for cigarettes. These people, because they can walk away, they don't burden themselves with a tax. But nonetheless, because they're very price sensitive, even though tax only shot their equilibrium price slightly, because they cut back significantly, a lot of teenagers fell out of love with smoking because of tax policies to discourage them. Although we hear lately that more and more teenagers are becoming hooked to cigarettes. I don't know exactly what is the psychology there, but that's apparently is happening. So we may have to engage in more heavily taxing policies in order to see if we could discourage teenagers from smoking. So we had an exam question. One was with respect to aspirin, one with respect to two groups of people, those who lost their homes in a tornado, and the other ones were saying, okay, honey, let's think about maybe we should sell the house, cash the money, put it in a different kind of investment, take some vacations. In the meantime, we go rent. After all, the way situations are, renting is not bad. Every time something goes wrong, you call, you don't have to repair anything, etc., etc. So suddenly you have one group of people who have no choice but to pay whatever the market bears for rent because they lost their homes, then they're out in the cold or staying in a church or school. And the other group, they have choice. If the price is right, they go for it, and if not, they can wait. So therefore, that was the purpose of that question, to understand the demand for rental housing from two different groups, and your ability to translate that information to this using this tool was what I was looking for. Okay? Because when you answer the exam questions related to, let's say, chapter 4 and 5, you go and say, all right, what's the key in chapter 5? Well, consumer demand and demand elasticity. Therefore, some of these questions need understanding of these two concepts to answer it. Chapter 5 is about supply, cost, production, productivity. Therefore, chances are that some of the questions on the exam rely on the material related to supply, cost, production, and productivity to answer. That's simple. So, we effectively finished what you need to know as far as the consumer demand is concerned. You understood the demand curve, the correlation between price and quantity. Then you understood the role of other variables, such as tornado. Demand for rental home is impacted whether you have hurricane or tornado that destroys some of the homes or not. If those kind of disasters don't happen, the demand for rental home would be normal sort of a situation. But as soon as large part of the state is affected by tornado, then suddenly a lot of people will jump on the rental properties to get yourself a roof over their head. So that means that the demand will not only shift to the right for rental, and these are rents. Price of rental property is called rent, but its price is the demand for rental property will not only shift to the right, but become less price sensitive. People don't care. They pay. You just give me a place to live for now until we settle with the insurance or this and that. You just go ahead and empty your bank account and pay to get yourself. Price of a rental home is called rents, but that you could say price of rental properties, or just the word we have for it is called rents, right? So, some of the questions in the exam, you rely on demand and demand elasticity to analyze. What happens, for example, you are ill, you buy certain drugs, they produce it for you. You are ill and your health depends on taking this drug, therefore your demand for it is high, and you don't mess with it, you buy it because your welfare, your health, your survival depends on it. This is the price you pay, let's say $100, and you buy 30 pills per month. Now, suddenly, you improve and you don't need as much of this drug anymore. Or, if that's the case, your demand shifts to the left, but since you still depend on this drug, except less of it, the demand only shifts to the left without any change in your price sensitivity. You just buy less of it, maybe 15 pills per month, and all other things considered, you probably pay $50 for it. But what if not only you improve and you need less of this drug per month, but there are two other companies that enter in the market selling exactly the same drug, or the generic comes into the market that you could switch to. Generic is called a substitute good, or those other companies that make similar drug are called substitute goods. So what happens to your demand for this product? Well, simple. Not only you buy less of it, but because you have choice elsewhere, generic and so forth, lower price, you become also price sensitive. So you buy less and you shop around for alternative prices. This was when you bought less, but you couldn't shop around. You still remain price insensitive. But this is a case where you buy less and you can shop around because there's a generic on board and there are other products. So you can see that if you understand the basics of this tool set, at this point, as you can notice, I left the supply just a generic, nothing non-specific, 45-degree, just there for the completeness of our analysis, because we need the supply curve to find the equilibrium price and quantity values. But at this point we didn't talk much about it, except that we know that when the price goes down, supply also has to go down to reach the new equilibrium. Okay, so that's all you need to answer any exam, the one we just took, or the ones that may appear in the final exam, that you determine to be related to the demand, not the supply, and therefore you leave the supply as is in the model. You just decide, do I shift it to the right? Do I shift it to the left? What does it mean? Do I shift it to the right and make it less price sensitive or inelastic, or do I shift it to the left and make it more price sensitive? Sometimes you could, let's say there's a supply and a demand for a product, and you increase your demand for it just because you suddenly love it or somebody told you something good about it. But it just happens that as you fall in love with a product, there are multiple vendors also supplying the product. They anticipated that the population is going to like this stuff. So as you like the product, you buy more, but because you have many different vendors to choose from, you shop around. So the demand shifts to the right, but becomes more price sensitive. Imagine you always go to your local grocery store and buy tomatoes and cucumbers and lettuce, and then you hear that the farmer's market has just opened up a few blocks from your house. So suddenly you say, I'm going to buy more produce, I'm going to eat more fresh vegetables as part of my diet. So your demand for produce, if this was quantity of produce and price of produce. Now, it's all right, from now on I'm going to buy more produce as a part of my diet. But because you have your local grocery store and then now you have a farmer's market, you juggle between these two, between farmer's market and your local store, to get the best prices. Any questions up to this point? Now, I like to point out that when I explain these things, you listen and you say, I got it. I mean, that makes sense. I relate to it, I understand it. But when I give you an exam question, if then suddenly it's possible that you freeze a little bit. You say, okay, now I thought I understood it when he explained it in all those examples that he used, but which one is it? Am I thinking correctly, etc., etc.? And then you kind of let it freeze, and you kind of begin to have doubts. Yeah, Jonathan just says exactly the same. It makes sense when you're doing it. I can explain it, just can't get the graph right. But the reason, Jonathan, you cannot get the graph right is because you're not quite solid in understanding of what the demand curve is, what is the elasticity of demand, which way you shift it, right, left, do you make it more price inelastic, do you make it more price elastic, etc., etc. And that's why you sort of begin to have doubts as to whether you're thinking correctly and so forth. That's why graph is useful to keep you honest. Because if you're thinking to yourself, first you have to start by thinking, how I'm going to answer this. What does it really happen? Without reading too much. Because somebody said, well, when you're hit by hurricane, you go and stay with relatives and so forth. But yeah, of course, some people stay with relatives, but most people try to find a rental home to quickly move in until they figure out what becomes of their future. Certain percentage move in with their family, in-laws, and so forth. Others leave the state, and yes, all of that possibilities. But generally speaking, if the question says what happens to the market for rentals, don't think about relatives, and don't think about churches and schools that you can go and stay in. The question says what happens to the market for rentals. Therefore, you say, all right, some people need to rent. Some people may just go stay with relatives. That's fine. But the question is asking you to focus on rent and rental properties. Therefore, you need to cleanse your mind. Don't let your mind wander around too much and consider all sorts of possibilities. Just focus on the question, and that will help you some. Now you say I can't get the graph is because you're just beginning to learn it, and it takes time. It takes time to remember what the demand curve is, what does it do, what does it represent. It takes a little bit of time to incorporate the concept of elasticity. What does it mean to be elastic demand or inelastic demand? And then you combine these two as to whether you shift it to the right or to the left, and you shift it to the right and make it elastic or inelastic, or shift it to the left and make it elastic or inelastic. Then you will slowly get a hang of it. But that's why the exams are take-home exams. You have a whole week to think through it, brainstorm it, draw it, stare at it, to say, does it say what I want to say? Am I thinking correctly? And then set it aside, chat with some people, say, what do you think? And say, I think this way. So, well, kind of agree or disagree. And in that process, you learn and grow. And that's why I give it a take-home. And I never told anybody to prohibit you from talking to each other, because you need that type of interaction sometimes to cross-examine. And of course, if you believe in the other person and he or she happens to be wrong, then you obviously took things at face value and trusted that they know what they're talking about. And you shouldn't have. You should have kind of listened to what they say and then sort of use your own judgment and so forth. Hopefully this little review will go a very long way to capture almost 6 weeks of trying to sort the demand side of the products and services. And so when next time you see an exam question or a question about your everyday life, you ask yourself, is it a demand question or a supply question? If you decide that it's a demand question, then you say, okay, is it that the consumer is price sensitive or price insensitive as the starting point? And then you say, all right, now we'll look at this situation. Has it made the consumer more price sensitive or no different or less price sensitive? So therefore, this knowledge of consumer price sensitivity is so important that every vendor, every retailer is trying to understand that, measure it, calculate it, so that they know how to position. That's why I think if you look at your textbook, this is the demand curve before ad campaign, and then this is the demand curve after ad campaign. What happens? The same supply for the product. This was the demand before the ad campaign began. The typical seller sold this quantity and was able to charge this price. After a successful ad campaign, not only they managed to get more people buying the product, but they also fell in love with the product, and there slowly you jack up the price. Okay. Now you say that none of us agree how to do it. Well, I don't know how much time you guys spend together brainstorming these things, but if you can't agree, then it means that all of you have a little doubt here and there, and you need to go back and review the questions again, re-examine your understanding, go back to the notes, go back to the textbook, etc., etc., to see if you really need to rethink and convince the other. And you're absolutely right, on page 94, right. What if the ad campaign falls apart? It turns out to be a terrible idea, and this was original demand curve. They were trying to make it bigger, but it actually falters, and so people are turned off by the product, and the demand not only shrinks, people refuse to pay the kind of price they used to pay. They say, forget it, I don't need it, I can do without it, I can go something else, I can actually drop the whole product, it doesn't kill me if I didn't consume it, and so forth. So therefore, hopefully the two of you, next time, if people ask for your opinion, you can refer to this discussion and lead the conversation. I'm going to pause here and see if there are questions or comments that you'd like to make. Is this making a lot more sense, a little bit more sense? Are you beginning to feel comfortable, or are you still way down lost? Yeah, but try to make sense and feel good about it fast, because unfortunately, at least this semester, next semester, since we have been through these things, then you'll go through this section very briefly and get on with the other topics, but try to internalize, understand, relate to. The way you done the graphs makes more sense, right? Again, I'm following the logic. What does the demand represent? Demand represents different quantity and prices. What happens if price of substitute goes up? or people buy more of this product, they might not only buy more of this product, as long as it's not a whole lot more, as long as it's still less expensive than the competition, people begin to pay even better prices for what they have been buying. If the competition drops the price, some people switch to the other product, demand will shift, and since now they have a choice, they won't pay the top price they once did, they start shopping around. That explains why, at least in this part of the North Carolina, there used to be a Honda dealers and Toyota and Nissan by different companies. Now 2 or 3 of these company or these brands owned by one person or one company. Why? Because they are, particularly Honda and Toyota, are close substitutes. When Honda became more expensive, people moved to the Toyota market. When Toyota prices went up, people switched to Honda. Nissan, a little bit of a distant substitute, but still in the same category of foreign-made cars with a better durability, whatever. And so people used to go back and forth between dealers and say, well, you know what, I just was at the Toyota dealership and they gave me this deal and this guy has to lower the price. So what they have done is that one person bought all the brands, and they will not allow you anymore to come in and say the guy up the road gives me a better deal, because they don't give you a better deal. The guy can decide what deal they can give, and they won't give you the kind of deal that would ruin their market. So William, you're absolutely correct. A lot of people read too much in the question and confuse themselves. Now, this is not uncommon. In real life, often you go into business meetings or have discussions, and it was supposed to be something simple to decide and get on with it, and suddenly people read too much in the conversation and mushrooms. And what would have been 1 meeting or 2 meetings, decide and move forward, becomes 3 years and they still haven't figured out what to do. Just because people read too much in the question, they get themselves confused, they don't know how to think about it, they don't know if they're on the demand side of this question or the supply side of the question, so it becomes a total chaos, and that's why it becomes a protracted decision-making process. All right. Again, now that you understand these ideas and the tool and the theory, look around yourself, list number of products, and ask yourself, what is it, how much I buy right now? Does it have substitutes or competitors like breakfast cereal or God knows what? Does it matter to you? Are you loyal? And up to what degree are you loyal? If you buy a certain brand of coffee, you're willing to, and you love it, you're willing to, pay the higher price. But what if suddenly the price went up by 80%? Will you begin to consider alternative coffee brands, or you still pay the 80% price hike? Or you may pay the higher price but cut back on the amount you consume. So therefore you remain price insensitive, but you cut back on the amount, which means this is a supply of coffee, this is who you are, and then when the price goes up from here to there, you cut back, because price went up, I'm not shifting the curve. You cut back a little bit, but that's only a little bit. If this was your demand curve and the price jumps from here to here, you cut back big time. Make a list of maybe 5-10 products that you regularly consider, you buy, part of your family diet, whatever, vacation, and go through this exercise and ask yourself, what is the current price? At what point I will consider competition products? Or what happens if this other stuff that I usually buy? Imagine you have a backyard barbecue and then you have the meat and then a bunch of other stuff. What happens to the price of other stuff? If they go up or down, would that impact your plans for family barbecue? Just make a list of several products that you want to toy with, play with, and go through this exercise for yourself to fully convince yourself the usefulness of this analysis and this analytical tool. And then by then you should be very comfortable. Now, if you're already trained economist, you don't draw graphs. People know. As soon as I say to another economist that this product became price sensitive and used to be a top of the line, everybody paid for it, but there are dime a dozen now, and people in fact have stopped liking the product because it used to be a prestigious product. You consumed it because it gave you social status, but nobody cares anymore. In fact, it's become a low-class product, etc. I don't need to draw the graphs, they follow me. But for now, you need to draw the graph so that you would develop both analytical skills as well as to make sure that your conclusion is logical. Because if you say one thing in words and your graph doesn't lead to the same conclusion, either you're saying something incorrectly, your graph is incorrect. That's the value of a math or graphical presentation of an idea, is that it keeps you on track and makes sure that what you are thinking can be demonstrated, and if cannot be, then either you're thinking incorrectly or you drew the model incorrectly, and you have a way of check and balance. Any questions whatsoever or comments at this point? All right. Well, I'm glad we're making some headways here, and usually these one-on-one sort of sessions when students are struggling goes a long way. I don't want to oversell the idea. You still need to go back and review all of these things and read the textbook now with a fresh set of eyes and mindset, and suddenly the stuff that you overlooked begin to make more sense, etc., etc. But you need to go through and backtrack and do that in order to fully absorb this into your mind, and be able to stay and use it for a long time to come, as opposed to be glad that the course is over and you don't have to think about it. Because if you understand this stuff, it helps you to understand so much about the world around you that is unbelievable. Super. All right. Looks like you're serious and you want to learn, and I'm delighted to spend the time with both of you. And I hope others will seize the opportunity and ask for a review session. Now, we exhausted the demand side. We're going to talk about the supply side. The first thing that we want to talk about is the law of supply. In this case, price and quantity are positively correlated, holding everything else constant. In the book sometimes say ceteris paribus is a Latin word meaning holding everything constant. Alright, so that's the law of supply. What it means is that you pay me higher prices, I'll bring more to the market. If you cut back on the price you pay me, I will cut back in bringing the product to the market. That's the positive correlation. Higher price, higher quantity offered, lower price, lower quantity offered by the suppliers. So let's give it a shape. Supply curve, quantity and price. This is the price. If you pay me this much, I'll bring this quantity to the market. If you paid me less, no, because it doesn't cover my cost. But if you paid me this price, it covers my cost plus something extra for me, I will bring this much to the market. You pay me more, provided that my cost doesn't go up, just you pay me more, I bring more to the market. And this process continues, of course, up to a certain point, not forever. So if I connect these points, I get the supply curve. Alright, so you say, is there anything else besides the price that triggers a supplier to bring products to the market or not? Obviously, the answer is yes. So we look at the supply function. It's a function, it's a functional form, it's not an equation. It just tells you the relationships of a bunch of variables. So we say quantity supplied of a certain product, A, whatever that is, depends on its price of A. Alright, we already accounted for that. Quantity of A, price of A. And the relationship is a positive one. What else? Well, available inputs. I have to have inputs, I have to have labor, I have to have floor space, I have to have raw material, I have to have energy, I have to have whatever it takes. If I have it, I bring more. If I don't have it, I lose my ability to bring the product to the market. So in this case, I'll hold the price constant, and that's what I do. Now if you give me more input, more head count, for example, I can give you more products. I can crank up. You give me more head count, I give you more products. If you take away some of my head count, or some of my machines, or some floor space, or some of the raw material, I lose my ability to deliver, and I cut back. Role of technology. Technology is not about input, it's about how you change the way you do things. How you organize the office, how you automate or less automate, whether you move to China or Vietnam or Philippines or Mexico or New York State, whatever. Anytime you change things around, it's not about the input, it's about how you do the business. You change the technology. I'm not going to bug you too much on this concept. It's a very interesting area of consideration. But only to remember, this is the original supply curve. When you change the way you do business, you change the technology of doing business, if it's successful, it will bring the cost down. What it means is that for me to do this level of production, I had to receive this price from the market. Okay, I'll put a Q star. For me to do this level of production, I have to receive this price from the market. Okay, but if I can do something clever, maybe automation, maybe I change the management, maybe I change the way people are organized on the factory floor, eliminate waste, whatever I do, and it turns out to be a good technological improvement, then I can deliver the same level of product because technology has reduced cost. I can actually price it below the previous price because my cost went down. I can price it at a lower level, or because the technology has made my resources more useful, more productive, I can expand production. I can either drop the price. If I'm not interested in more product, nobody's going to buy more, I can lower the price and compete with somebody else who hasn't managed to come up with the new ideas. I'm the one who came up with a cost reduction project. My competitor haven't. So if that's the case, I can drop the price if that's all I want to produce, or I can expand production to a new level. But anyway, whether it's this point or this point, the supply curve not only shifts, becomes flatter, which means every level of production costs less, I can price it less. And by the same token, if I change the way I do business and it turns out to be a terrible idea, and we all have seen terrible ideas, cost goes up. Bad technological change. It was a snake oil somebody sold, or it was corrupt managers who got together and did something crazy, whatever. In this case, cost goes up. I have to raise prices for the same level of production because my cost has gone up. Okay? Or I have to cut back on production. So therefore, this supply curve becomes steeper. Means that every level of production that I do is more expensive, more costly. I have to charge higher prices for it. Whether I can get away with it from consumer standpoint is a different story. But it costs me more because technology was a bad idea that I implemented. And the only difference between inputs and technology is that inputs are parallel shift. Technology, if it's successful, is shift and flattening. If it's unsuccessful, shifts to the left and becomes steeper. And then I can talk about government regulations. If I impose regulations, that adds to the cost. So the same level of production, I have to charge higher prices, so supply shifts to the left. If I relax regulations, then my cost goes down. I can charge at the same level of production, I can drop the price, so supply shifts to the right. I can think of taxes. If I impose a tax, it's just like additional cost. For the same level of production, I have to charge higher prices, so supply shifts to the left. If I drop taxes for the same level of output, I can drop prices and supply shifts drops to the right, and so forth. I can think of subsidy. If I subsidize a producer, it's like as if I'm giving them cost reduction. If your cost goes down because government is subsidizing you, your supply shifts to the right. If I remove the subsidy, the cost will go up. You go back to where you were, or maybe even to the left. Of course, on the demand side, you can give subsidy to consumers. That was part of the question we had, I believe, in the exam, that the subsidy was not given to the owners of rental properties. They were given to people who had to rent. Government said, I know you lost everything. The rent prices have gone up. Go find yourself a place, negotiate, and I'll pay 50%. Whatever is the rent, I pay 50%, you pay 50%, so that you don't have to go in a desperate situation and so forth. So I'm going to close the parentheses here, meaning that supply is not an open-ended conversation. Is one of these things handles everything. Okay, so that's the supply curve, that's the supply function. Once again, when there's a change in the price, only you move up and down on the curve. If other variables like input availability, technology, government regulations, taxes, and so forth, they change, I hold the price constant this time and let these other variables be accounted for by shifting to the right and shifting to the left. Okay. Next, I'm going to talk about price supply elasticity. I'm not going to go too much in this direction, but as you saw in the case of a technology, this was the original supply curve. This is a supply curve where it's easier to do the job, costs are lower, and therefore you can expand if the price is attractive. In this case, if the price went up, I can expand only this much. For whatever reason, I can only react this much. In this case, if the price went up, maybe I can react with a bigger production. This is more elastic supply curve than this one. This is less, this is inelastic supply curve. Draw it again. Inelastic supply curve means that price can go up significantly, but the supplier is unable to react to this incentive and expand production for whatever reason. It's complicated, regulated, inputs are not available, market can pay you all sorts of prices. You cannot find people to work on the project, period. There are not enough of them. So therefore, they can pay you through the roof and you cannot, at least in the short run, expand production. All right, so that's the concept there. Now we're going to do something different, and at this point we want to talk about production and cost. Let's start with the production. Here I'm going to look at input output model. Input like labor. When I have 0 people working, nothing comes out of the factory. Doesn't matter. We have a big factory, all the machines, but you need somebody to come to flip the switches and turn the heat, etc., etc. So if there's nobody showing up, nothing happens. When I throw one person in, production happens. Throw a second person, production happens. Third person, production happens. Every time goes up. Fourth person doesn't do anything for the factory. So going from 0 production to, let's say, 10, that's marginal physical product of the first person is 10 units. Go from 10 to 20, marginal physical product of the second person is 20 units. I'm sorry, another 10 units. So you're up to 20, 10 and 10, 20. The last person gives you 8 more, so you're up to 28, but marginal physical product of the third person is 8. Fourth person contributed nothing to the overall production, so had marginal physical product of 0. Okay, so that's your production function. In fact, if I hire the 5th person, production may suffer. This person crowds the place or gets in the way of others and so forth. So production actually drops. That's very important idea. If I make this labor more productive by giving them better tools, better machinery, or train them, or motivate them, The same one person can give me more, second two people can give me more, the same three people can give me more, and so forth. The production function shifts up. Everybody now gives me more than before because they are more productive. If they're more productive, this is cost. If workers are more productive, my cost goes down. Average cost goes down. Because they're more productive, they give me more for the same hours they work, therefore they're cheaper to me, the cost goes down. If, for whatever reason, people are not productive, they're tired, they're old, they have not been trained for a long time, machines keep breaking down and they have to sit around until somebody fixes them and so forth, or they're reporting to a bad manager who always want to harass them, and then they're pissed off and they don't really want to be working at all if they can help it. So every worker now gives you less, I'm sorry. Well, if they're less productive for the same hours that they're on the job and I'm paying them same wages, the cost goes up. So this is original, this is when things are better, and this is when things are worse. When things are better, cost drops. When things are worse, cost rises. Okay? So, if we go back to the supply curve, remember these each have different variables. This is quantity and price. This is quantity and cost. This is input. This is output. So remember, every one of these have a different variables on the axis. Is sometimes easy to forget. This is input, like labor, and an output Q. When it comes to cost, this is output. We track to see what happens to cost. This one is the market, and this is price and quantity. Okay. When my technology and production looks like this, that's my supply curve. When I improve things around, my supply curve shifts to the right, maybe become even flatter. Cost goes down. Every point of this supply, it reflects lower cost, and therefore my ability to drop the price if I want to, provided that my competition is not onto the same idea or something. If the competition is on the same idea, I have to drop the price, because if I don't, they will. If they're not onto the same idea, I can take advantage of lower cost and add to my profitability. But at the same token, when productivity of workers is shot, everybody's giving me less output than before, cost begins to go up. So therefore supply curve looks like this. Every level of production along this supply curve costs more, therefore I have to price it higher. So for the same level of production, this was the cost and therefore price. Now I have to charge this price because my cost has gone up. Okay? This pretty much wraps up any question you will see that is supply side, has to do with production, has to do with the cost. You look at the question and say, this is a supply side question. It's not about consumers. It's not about buyers. It's not about demand. It's about technology, about management. It's about training. It's about policies. Is about taxes that affects the producers, is about government regulations, is about cost of inputs, is about labor and workers to be more productive, less productive, and so forth and so on. Those are all supply side. And you use this set of tools, concepts, and attack it from this direction using one or several of these ideas to analyze the issue. So with this existing demand curve, you can see the different scenarios. This was original price and quantity. When things are improved as a result of improvement in productivity and cost went down, I can produce more and lower the price. If productivity was shot, cost went up, then supply curve shifted to the left, then my production goes down and the price has to be set higher. Okay. So that sort of captures the supply side of the market for individual producer, etc. And so when you look at an exam question, once again, you ask yourself, is it demand side, is it supply side? If it's a demand side, use the earlier tools. Only throw in there a generic supply curve. If you decide that this is a supply side question, just throw in there a generic demand curve for a completeness of the analysis, and then follow this track to decide where it ends up and what would be the outcome of the price and quantity. I'm going to pause here and ask you if you have questions. Fantastic. I'm glad that is making sense. What I would like for you to do is now, with this background, go back and read chapter 5, chapter 4, because those are where all these ideas come together. Chapter 1, 2, 3 kind of sets the basics, and then chapter 4 and 5 begin to apply these ideas. And then chapter, I believe, 8 on competition also brings some of these ideas into the picture. And this week we're going to do the monopoly model, etc. And then maybe one more chapter and the semester is over. But in the meantime, try to relate these ideas and try to make sense. Try to find issues around you at work, at home, etc. You just say, well, can you give me some examples of this? Yes. Let's say you're cooking dinner. This would be when you cook out of a box and a microwave. So this is output, cooking, dinner. And this is price of dinner at home. This would be a supply curve with box and out of box and microwave. You can cook this much, you can cook that much. Just price doesn't change in terms of your time and effort. This would be the supply of production of dinner with some frozen items and stove. So you can produce this quantity or that quantity. Takes more time and effort compared to this one. When you have to make more, it becomes more time consuming, use more ingredients that are more expensive and so forth. This would be a supply of dinner from scratch. Everything. So if you want to invite a few people just to make a little bit more dishes, cost of time and resource goes up so high that to you is more expensive. Okay. Another example. This is a quantity of medical care for common cold. This is a price of medical care for common cold. This would be the supply curve if you go to see a doctor. Expensive, wait time, appointment 3 days from now, drive in there, wait, etc., etc. This would be the supply curve with nurse practitioner. Cheaper price because they're less skilled, they charge lower prices, you don't have to wait as much, maybe you can get an appointment right away, etc. if you agree to see the nurse practitioner. This would be the supply for walk-in CVS clinic. You just walk in, around the corner, no wait time, no nothing. So same doctor visit at the doctor's is $275. If you agree to see the nurse is maybe $175. If you agree to go to a local clinic is $75. Okay, and if you go on the web and use the webcam to see a doctor, this is supply with the web on MD on web. So this one could be charging you $50. Every one of these is a different supply function, different production function, different productivity, different cost structure, and as a result is priced differently. Okay, so around work, find ideas that have been implemented. Do they become better, cheaper to do the job, or they actually made things worse? The difference between a handsaw and a power saw, or a hammer versus a nail gun, on and on and on. All of these will have a different impact on the cost, on the productivity, on the supply curve, etc. So find ideas and products around you in your personal experience and try to picture this and draw it and say, how was it before, how it became after, etc., etc. And this way you can begin to relate to these ideas. And the value of it is that once you have this in your head, then when you're sitting around on the factory floor or a meeting and are thinking of redesigning some of the operations, your brain brings you back to this. You ask questions. These ideas are going to do this to the production, bring costs down, make it more efficient. You can expand production with ease, or it's going to backfire because the guy who's talking about it, he doesn't know what he's talking about. And if you went along with it and didn't speak up, everything will become more complicated, more convoluted, and therefore more resource gobbling, more expensive, and therefore sooner or later you have to raise prices. The market wouldn't let you raise prices because competitors didn't make the same mistake. You go out of business. I hope this session was helpful. It is 10:45. My time is 9:45, is not as bad for you. So I'm going to pause here to see if you have questions or comments before we wrap it up. And I'm going to transfer this file down so I could put it on the YouTube so you could watch it again and again if you need to. I'll just pause here and wait for your comments or questions. Yeah, the midterm that I gave you another chance to take a shot at it now with this background. Yeah, get it to me as soon as you can. Yes. I'm so glad to hear that, William, and keep in touch and encourage your cohorts your friends to look for the link I'm going to send out by tomorrow sometimes. Encourage them to take a look since they couldn't come, but I will be more than happy to sit down with them one-on-one as well. And thank you so much for taking the initiative to do something about the problem. And